The thunderous rumble rolled across the Arizona plains as Margaret Zimmer shielded her eyes against the darkening sky, her heart racing with the realization that she was too far from town with disaster bearing down. It was 1885 in Williams, Arizona territory, and the sky had turned an unnatural shade of green-black that every frontier dweller knew meant only one thing: a tornado was coming, and she was completely exposed on the open road. "Miss, get down here now if you value your life." A deep voice cut through the howling wind, and Margaret whirled to see a tall cowboy waving frantically from beside a storm cellar door half hidden in the ground not 20 yards away. Without hesitation, she gathered her skirts and ran toward him, the first fat raindrops pelting her face as the wind whipped her chestnut hair free from its pins. The stranger grabbed her arm just as a deafening crack of thunder shook the earth, pulling her forcefully down the wooden steps into the darkness below. "That was closer than comfort allows," he said, slamming the heavy door shut above them and securing it with a thick wooden beam. The cellar plunged into darkness until he struck a match, lighting a kerosene lantern that cast long shadows across the earthen walls. In the amber glow, Margaret got her first proper look at her rescuer, a broad-shouldered man with a strong jawline weathered by sun and wind, intense blue eyes beneath a furrowed brow, and a day's worth of stubble darkening his face. He'd lost his hat in their rush to safety, revealing sandy blonde hair that fell across his forehead. "I'm Adam Garrett," he said, extending a calloused hand. "And you picked one hell of a day for a stroll, miss." Margaret took his hand, finding his grip firm but not crushing. "Margaret Zimmer." "I wasn't strolling, Mr. Garrett. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back, and I was trying to make it to town before the storm hit." She brushed dirt from her now ruined dress. "I appreciate your timely intervention." Adam nodded, settling onto an upturned crate as the wind howled overhead. "Well, Miss Zimmer, looks like we're going to be keeping each other company until this blows over." He gestured to the small space around them. "Welcome to my humble storm cellar. Not much, but it'll keep us alive. Do you live nearby?" Margaret asked, looking around at the sparse but well-maintained shelter stocked with supplies. "My ranch is just over that rise," Adam said, pointing vaguely upward. "I was securing the livestock when I spotted you on the road." He paused, studying her with curiosity. "You're not from Williams, are you? I'd remember seeing you around town." Margaret smoothed her hair self-consciously. "I arrived just yesterday. My uncle, Samuel Zimmer, owns the general store. I've come to help him after my aunt passed." The cellar shuddered as something heavy struck the door above, making Margaret jump. Adam remained calm, merely glancing upward. "These spring storms can be fierce, but the cellar's solid. Built it myself 3 years ago after watching a twister take my neighbor's barn." He offered her a canteen of water. "Might be a long wait. Tornadoes are quick, but this storm system looks to have settled in." Margaret accepted the water gratefully. "I've never experienced a tornado before. In Boston, we have nor'easters, but nothing that turns the sky that ghastly color." "Boston?" Adam raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a journey to make alone." "Necessity often outweighs convention, Mr. Garrett," Margaret replied with a hint of defensiveness. At 26, she'd grown weary of explaining her unmarried status and independent travel. A faint smile crossed Adam's face. "No judgment here, Miss Zimmer. Out west, we value capability over convention. And please call me Adam." The storm raged above them as they talked, the howling wind occasionally punctuated by crashes that made Margaret wince. Adam spoke of his cattle ranch, which he'd built from nothing after coming west at 19. Now, at 30, he had a modest spread with a growing herd and plans to expand. Margaret shared stories of Boston, her work as a schoolteacher, and her decision to come west after her parents' deaths left her with few ties to the east. "Uncle Samuel is my only remaining family," she explained. "When Aunt Judith died, he wrote asking if I might consider coming to help with the store. It seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start." "Williams is a good town," Adam said. "Growing since the railroad came through. Your uncle's store does well." "You know him?" Margaret asked, surprised. "Everyone knows everyone in Williams, Miss Zimmer. Your uncle sold me my first proper saddle when I barely had 2 coins to rub together. Let me pay it off in installments over a year." Adam's expression turned thoughtful. "Good man. He'll be worried sick about you in this storm." "Please, if I'm to call you Adam, you must call me Margaret." She rubbed her arms against the cellar's dampness. Without thinking, Adam removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said softly, surprised by the gesture. Their eyes met briefly in the lantern light before Adam cleared his throat and turned away, checking the cellar door. "Sounds like the worst might have passed," he said, listening to the wind that had diminished from a roar to a persistent moan. "But the rain's still coming down hard. We'd best wait a bit longer." As they sat in the dim cellar, Margaret found herself studying Adam's profile, struck by his quiet confidence and the way he moved with purpose in the small space. Unlike the polished men of Boston society, there was something refreshingly genuine about him, a man defined by actions rather than words. When Adam finally deemed it safe enough to venture outside, he pushed open the cellar door to reveal a transformed landscape. The road was now a river of mud. Trees had been stripped of branches and debris littered the fields. "My God," Margaret whispered, surveying the destruction as rain continued to fall in sheets. "Could have been worse," Adam said, helping her up the slippery steps. "The funnel cloud must have passed just north of us." He pointed to where a stand of trees had been sheared off at varying heights. "There's no way you can walk to town in this. My ranch house is intact, thank Providence. I insist you wait out the storm there." Margaret hesitated, acutely aware of propriety. "Mr. Garrett, Adam, I couldn't possibly. My housekeeper, Mrs. Finley, lives on the property," he added, understanding her concern. "Your reputation will remain untarnished and you'll be dry. Unless you prefer pneumonia as a souvenir of your first Arizona tornado." Despite herself, Margaret laughed. "When you put it that way, I accept your hospitality, though I'm certain Uncle Samuel is indeed worried." "First thing tomorrow, I'll take you to town," Adam promised, offering his arm for stability as they navigated the muddy ground toward his ranch house visible through the rain. Margaret had not expected the substantial 2-story home that emerged as they approached. Built of sturdy timber with a wide covered porch wrapping around 3 sides, it spoke of prosperity and permanence, not the crude bachelor quarters she had imagined. "You built this yourself as well?" she asked, impressed. "With help," Adam admitted. "A man can't raise roof beams alone." He guided her up the porch steps, boots squelching with water. The front door flew open before they reached it. A stout woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun stood with hands on her hips, her weathered face creased with concern. "Adam Garrett." "I was about to send the hands out searching for you." Her gaze shifted to Margaret, eyes widening. "And who might this be?" "Mrs. Finley, this is Miss Margaret Zimmer, Samuel Zimmer's niece from Boston. The storm caught her on the road." Adam performed the introduction as they stepped inside. "Miss Zimmer, my housekeeper and the reason I haven't starved to death these past 5 years." Mrs. Finley's expression softened immediately. "Samuel's niece. The poor thing, you're soaked to the bone. Come with me this instant." She turned to Adam. "You too, Mr. Garrett. Out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." Within the hour, Margaret found herself in dry clothing, a simple dress borrowed from Mrs. Finley that was too short and too wide but blissfully dry, seated at a large wooden table in a warm kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Adam had also changed and now sat across from her, his hair still damp, drinking coffee as Mrs. Finley busied herself preparing an impromptu meal. "The road to town will be impassable until tomorrow at the earliest," Adam explained. "Spring rains turn that clay to glue." "You're welcome to stay as long as needed," Mrs. Finley added, setting a steaming bowl of stew before Margaret. "I've already prepared the guest room." "You're both too kind," Margaret said, suddenly overwhelmed by their hospitality. In Boston, such care would have come with expectations or judgments. Here, it seemed offered as naturally as breathing. After dinner, Adam excused himself to check on his livestock and assess the storm damage, leaving Margaret in Mrs. Finley's capable hands. The housekeeper showed her to a comfortable bedroom on the second floor, provided a nightgown and fresh towels, and left her to rest. Later that evening, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Margaret wandered downstairs, drawn by the sound of a piano. She found Adam in what must have been the parlor, his fingers moving skillfully across the keys of a beautiful upright piano, playing a melancholy tune she didn't recognize. He stopped when he noticed her. "I apologize if I disturbed you." "Not at all," Margaret said, moving into the room. "I wouldn't have guessed you played." Adam smiled faintly. "My mother insisted, said even a cowboy should have some refinement." He ran his fingers over the keys without pressing them. "This was hers, the only thing I brought west from Pennsylvania." "You play beautifully," Margaret said, genuinely impressed. "Would you continue, please?" After a moment's hesitation, Adam resumed playing, this time a gentler melody. Margaret sat in a nearby chair, watching his hands and the concentration on his face, seeing yet another dimension to this man who had already surprised her multiple times in their brief acquaintance. When the last notes faded, Adam looked up to find Margaret wiping away a tear. "My mother used to play that," she explained softly. "I haven't heard it in years." Something unspoken passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of shared experiences despite their different paths. Adam closed the piano lid gently. "Tomorrow we'll be busy with repairs," he said, standing. "We should both get some rest, of course." Margaret rose as well. "Good night, Adam, and thank you again for everything." He nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim lamplight. "Good night, Margaret." As promised, Adam drove Margaret to town the following morning in a wagon that fought its way through muddy roads still bearing the scars of the storm. Williams appeared largely unscathed, though several buildings showed minor damage, and townspeople were busy with repairs. Samuel Zimmer, a balding man with kind eyes and a substantial gray beard, rushed from his store when he spotted them. His relief at seeing his niece safe was palpable as he embraced her. "Margaret, thank God. When the storm hit and you hadn't returned, I feared the worst." He held her at arm's length, examining her as if to assure himself she was unharmed, then turned to Adam. "Garrett, I'm indebted to you." "No debt, Mr. Zimmer. Just good fortune I spotted her when I did." Adam tipped his hat. "Your niece handled herself admirably through the ordeal." After promising to return Margaret's clothing once laundered and assuring the Zimmers he would retrieve her horse if he found it while riding his property, Adam took his leave, returning to his ranch, and the inevitable storm damage awaiting his attention. Margaret watched him go, a curious emptiness settling in her chest at his departure. She had known the man barely 24 hours, yet something about his quiet strength and unexpected depths had affected her more than she cared to admit. "He's a good man," Samuel remarked, noticing her gaze. "One of the hardest working in the territory, built that ranch from nothing but determination. So he mentioned, Margaret replied, turning toward the store. I should help you with today's business, Uncle. I've been gone long enough. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret settled into life in Williams. The general store kept her busy from dawn until dusk, as she learned the inventory, the accounts, and the peculiarities of frontier commerce. She met the townspeople who frequented the establishment: ranchers, miners, railroad workers, and their families, many of whom expressed relief at her safe return after the tornado. Of Adam Garrett, she saw little. He had indeed found her horse, returning the animal 3 days after the storm along with its saddle, which he had repaired. Their interaction had been brief and formal, with Adam declining Samuel's invitation to stay for dinner due to pressing work at his ranch. Margaret told herself the disappointment she felt was merely a natural response to the intense circumstances of their meeting. After all, what did she really know of the man beyond those fraught hours in a storm cellar and a single evening in his home? Yet she found her thoughts drifting to him in quiet moments, recalling the determination in his eyes when he pulled her to safety, the surprising gentleness of his piano playing, the way his rare smile transformed his serious face. "You're wool gathering again, Margaret," Samuel observed one afternoon as they restocked shelves. "That's the 3rd time you've put the coffee tins with the baking powder." Margaret flushed, rearranging the items. "Sorry, Uncle. I was just thinking about—" She trailed off, unwilling to admit where her thoughts had wandered. Samuel's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Young Garrett, perhaps?" "I barely know the man," Margaret protested, too quickly. "Sometimes that matters less than you'd think," Samuel replied cryptically, returning to his ledger. The following Saturday, Williams held its monthly social at the newly constructed town hall, a combination dance and potluck dinner that brought together residents from town and surrounding homesteads. Samuel insisted Margaret attend, dismissing her protests that she had nothing suitable to wear. "Nonsense," he declared. "Martha Peterson at the dress shop has been holding something for you. Consider it a belated welcome gift." The something proved to be a beautiful dress of deep blue cotton with delicate white piping, simple by Boston standards, but finely made and perfectly fitted, as Martha had taken Margaret's measurements weeks earlier at Samuel's request. "Uncle, this is too generous," Margaret protested. Samuel shook his head. "Your aunt and I never had children of our own. Let an old man spoil his only niece." The social was already underway when they arrived, the hall decorated with paper lanterns and spring wildflowers. A small band played lively tunes in one corner while townsfolk of all ages danced, ate, and socialized. Margaret had just finished being introduced to the mayor and his wife when she felt a presence at her elbow. Turning, she found herself face to face with Adam Garrett, more formally dressed than she had yet seen him, in a clean shirt, vest, and string tie, though he still wore his work boots. "Miss Zimmer," he said, the formality at odds with the warmth in his eyes. "You look well. Williams agrees with you." "Mr. Garrett," she returned, suddenly conscious of her quickening pulse. "Thank you. I'm adapting to frontier life better than I expected." A brief, awkward silence fell between them before Adam spoke again. "I wondered if you might honor me with a dance." He glanced toward the floor where couples were assembling for a reel. "I'd be delighted," Margaret replied, taking his offered arm. As they joined the dance, Margaret discovered that Adam moved with the same natural grace on the dance floor as he did in all things. His hand at her waist was respectful yet firm, guiding her through the turns with confidence. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Garrett," she remarked as they circled each other. "Piano playing and dancing. What other refinements are you hiding beneath that rancher's exterior?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Perhaps you'll have to discover them for yourself, Miss Zimmer. The dance ended too quickly, and Adam led her back toward her uncle. Before they reached Samuel, however, Adam hesitated. "I wonder if you might consider riding out to the ranch tomorrow afternoon," he said, the invitation coming out in a rush, unlike his usual measured speech. "Mrs. Finley has been asking after you, and I've some books I thought might interest you. Noticed you admiring my small library when you stayed." Margaret couldn't help but smile at his transparent excuse. "I'd enjoy that very much. I'll call for you around 2 if that's agreeable," he said, visibly relieved. "Perfectly agreeable," she confirmed. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur for Margaret, though she found herself repeatedly seeking Adam's tall figure in the crowd. She danced with several other men, the young doctor, a railroad engineer, and the banker's son, but none matched the peculiar awareness she felt in Adam's company. When they departed, Adam approached again to bid them good night, his gaze lingering on Margaret. "Until tomorrow," he said softly for her ears alone. "Until tomorrow," she echoed. The following afternoon, true to his word, Adam arrived at the store precisely at 2 o'clock. He had come on horseback, leading a gentle mare saddled for Margaret. "I thought we might ride if you're comfortable," he explained. "The day's too fine to be confined to a wagon." Margaret, who had ridden since childhood, eagerly agreed. Samuel watched their departure with an approving nod, waving off Margaret's offer to return early to help with closing. "Enjoy yourself," he called after them. "Don't worry about the time." The ride to Adam's ranch took them through countryside recovering from the tornado's violence. New growth already softened the damaged landscape, nature reclaiming what had been torn away. Adam pointed out landmarks along the way, including the spot where he had first seen Margaret during the storm. "You were a sight," he admitted. "Standing there with your back straight as a fence post, staring down that tornado like you might scold it into submission." Margaret laughed. "I was terrified and completely disoriented. I had no idea which way to run." "You didn't look terrified," Adam said, his expression serious. "You looked magnificent." The sincerity in his voice brought warmth to Margaret's cheeks, and she was grateful when they crested the final rise, bringing the ranch into view and providing a distraction. In daylight, unburdened by rain and fear, she could appreciate the true scope of Adam's achievement. Beyond the main house lay a complex of outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. Men worked in the distance, mending fences and tending livestock. "You've built all this in just 10 years?" Margaret asked, impressed. "Started with 50 acres and 6 cows," Adam confirmed. "Now it's over 2,000 acres and 300 head of cattle." There was pride in his voice, but no boastfulness. "Still modest compared to some spreads, but it's mine, free and clear." They stabled the horses, and Adam gave Margaret a tour of the main operations before leading her to the house, where Mrs. Finley welcomed her like a long-lost relative. "Look at you," the housekeeper exclaimed. "The color in your cheeks. Frontier life must agree with you after all, Miss Zimmer." After refreshments on the porch, where they watched the sun begin its westward descent, Adam showed Margaret to his study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves that had clearly been built with care and consideration. "My mother insisted on education," he explained, watching as Margaret examined the eclectic collection. "Said a man needs to exercise his mind as much as his body." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Margaret said, running her finger along leather spines that included Shakespeare, Dickens, and, surprisingly, several volumes of poetry. "She was." Adam's voice held old grief. "Lost her to influenza when I was 17. Father followed within a year, more from heartbreak than illness, I believe." Margaret turned to him. "I'm sorry. I lost my parents within months of each other as well, mother to pneumonia, father to a stroke shortly after. Adam nodded in understanding. Then you know how it feels, that sudden, rudderless sensation. As if the map you've been following suddenly shows different lands entirely. Margaret agreed softly. They stood in silence for a moment, connected by shared experience. Then Adam reached past her to select a volume from the shelf. "This is what I thought you might enjoy," he said, handing her a well-worn copy of Tennyson's poems. "You mentioned your fondness for the Lady of Shalott that night after the storm." Margaret took the book, touched that he had remembered such a small detail from their conversation. "Thank you. I'll treasure it. It's a loan," Adam clarified, a smile playing at his lips. "An excuse to ensure you visit again to return it." The directness of his statement surprised and pleased her. "I would visit again regardless, Mr. Garrett." "Adam," he corrected gently. "I think we're well past formalities, don't you?" Their eyes met, and Margaret felt a now familiar quickening of her pulse. "Adam," she agreed. The remainder of the afternoon passed pleasantly as they rode around the property's boundaries, Adam pointing out improvements he planned and challenges he faced. Margaret found herself genuinely interested in the ranch's operations, asking questions that seemed to please Adam with their insight. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Adam reluctantly suggested they should start back to town. "Though I'd much prefer to show you how the stars look from here," he added. "Far from town lights, they seem close enough to touch." "Perhaps another time," Margaret said, not hiding her regret at the necessity of their departure. The ride back to Williams was quieter, both lost in their thoughts as the daylight faded. When they reached the store, Samuel had already closed up for the day, but lights shone from the living quarters upstairs. Adam dismounted first, then moved to help Margaret down. His hands at her waist were steady as she slid from the saddle, but he didn't immediately release her when her feet touched the ground. "Thank you for coming today," he said, his voice low. "Would you consider riding with me again next Sunday? There's a spot along the river I'd like to show you." "I'd like that very much," Margaret replied, acutely aware of his hand still at her waist, of the scant distance between them. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. His eyes certainly suggested the possibility, but instead he stepped back, releasing her with obvious reluctance. "Until Sunday, then," he said, tipping his hat before mounting his horse. Margaret watched him ride away until he disappeared into the gathering darkness, clutching Tennyson's poems to her chest, and wondering at the curious mixture of contentment and anticipation filling her heart. Over the next several weeks, a pattern developed. Adam would call at the store during the week on business, lingering to speak with Margaret when possible. On Sundays, they would ride together, exploring the countryside around Williams as spring fully asserted itself across the land. They spoke of everything and nothing: childhood memories, books they had read, hopes and disappointments. Margaret learned of Adam's journey west, the hardships he had endured establishing his ranch, the failure of his first cattle drive, and the stubborn determination that had seen him through. In turn, she shared her experiences teaching in Boston, her decision not to accept any of the 3 marriage proposals she had received. From men who wanted a convenient companion rather than a wife, she explained, and her growing affection for the raw beauty of Arizona territory. With each meeting, the connection between them deepened. Margaret found herself thinking of Adam throughout her days, looking forward to their times together with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. For his part, Adam became more openly attentive. He began bringing small gifts: wildflowers he had gathered, a handkerchief he had noticed she admired in a catalog, once even a tiny carved wooden horse that fit in her palm. "You made this?" she had asked, delighted by the detailed craftsmanship. "Winter evenings get long," he had replied with a shrug, though his eyes had warmed at her obvious pleasure. The town noticed their growing attachment. Margaret overheard whispers in the store, caught knowing glances when Adam escorted her to church services, and fielded increasingly direct questions from the more forward ladies of Williams. "Adam Garrett's been a confirmed bachelor for years, Mrs. Peterson remarked while fitting Margaret for a summer dress. "Plenty have tried to catch his eye. You must have quite the special touch, Miss Zimmer." Samuel, for his part, seemed pleased by the development. "Adam's a man of substance and character," he told Margaret one evening. "More importantly, he looks at you the way a man should look at the woman he loves, like you're both the puzzle and its solution." By early June, Margaret had to acknowledge the truth to herself. She had fallen deeply in love with Adam Garrett. Whether he returned the feeling with equal measure, she could not be certain, though his actions suggested growing affection. They had not spoken of the future, nor had Adam made any declaration beyond his clear enjoyment of her company. His restraint, while gentlemanly, occasionally frustrated Margaret, who had never been one to leave matters unresolved. The opportunity to clarify their situation came unexpectedly during one of their Sunday rides. They had ventured further than usual, following a stream into a small box canyon where a waterfall cascaded down moss-covered rocks. They dismounted to rest the horses, spreading a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree for their picnic lunch. As they ate, dark clouds began gathering over the distant mountains. Adam eyed them with concern. "We should head back sooner than I'd planned," he said. "That's building into a summer thunderstorm and they can move fast." They packed quickly, but the storm moved faster. Before they could leave the canyon, the sky darkened dramatically and fat raindrops began to fall. Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. "The canyon's not safe," Adam shouted over the rising wind. "Flash floods come through here with little warning. We need to get to higher ground." He led them up a steep trail that zigzagged up the canyon wall, the horses struggling against the increasingly slippery path. They had almost reached the top when Margaret's mare lost its footing, sliding backward with a terrified whinny. Margaret managed to jump clear before the horse fell, landing hard on the muddy trail. The mare scrambled back to its feet, seemingly uninjured but panicked, and bolted past Adam back down the trail. "Are you hurt?" Adam was at her side instantly, helping her up, hands checking for injuries. "Just muddy and bruised," Margaret assured him, though her ankle protested when she put weight on it. "But I don't think I can climb down after the horse." "We're not going after her now," Adam said firmly. "There's a line shack just over this ridge. We can shelter there until the storm passes." Supporting her with an arm around her waist, Adam helped Margaret up the remainder of the trail and over the ridge. The line shack proved to be a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace, rough wooden floors, and minimal furnishings clearly designed as temporary shelter for cowboys working this section of the range. Adam got Margaret settled on the single cot while he secured his horse in the small attached lean-to, then returned to start a fire. Outside, the storm had intensified, rain lashing against the single window and thunder rolling continuously overhead. "Your ankle needs looking at," Adam said, kneeling before her once the fire was crackling. Gently, he removed her mudded boot and examined the already swelling joint. "Not broken, I think, but a bad sprain. You shouldn't walk on it." His fingers were gentle as he wrapped the injury with a bandana, his touch sending warmth through Margaret despite her wet clothing and the chill in the cabin. "We'll have to wait out the storm," he said, rising to hang their soaked jackets near the fire. "Could be hours. Are you warm enough?" Margaret nodded, though she shivered visibly. Adam frowned, then went to a trunk in the corner, returning with a wool blanket which he wrapped around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, clutching the rough fabric gratefully. "I seem to make a habit of getting caught in storms with you, Mr. Garrett." Adam smiled, sitting beside her on the cot. "I'm not complaining about the company, Miss Zimmer. The intimacy of their situation alone, miles from town as night approached, was not lost on either of them. Propriety demanded certain formalities, yet the circumstances made such concern seem trivial. "Adam," Margaret began, gathering her courage, "I find myself wondering where this path leads, these Sunday rides, our conversations, the time we spend together." Adam's expression grew serious. "I've been asking myself the same question." He took her hand, his own much larger and work-roughened. "Margaret, when I saw you standing in that storm 3 months ago, something changed for me. I'd lived contentedly alone for years, focused on building my ranch. Then suddenly there you were, and I discovered that contentment isn't the same as happiness." Margaret's heart quickened. "And have you found happiness now, when I'm with you?" His eyes met hers, intense and unwavering. "Yes, more than I believed possible." "Then why have you never—" Margaret paused, searching for words. "Never kissed you, never spoken of my feelings directly." Adam's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Because I wanted to be certain not of my feelings, which were clear almost immediately, but that Williams and ranch life could truly make you happy. You're educated, cultured. I couldn't bear to tie you to a life you might come to resent." The tenderness of his concern moved her deeply. "Adam Garrett, for a perceptive man, you've been remarkably blind," Margaret said softly. "I've never been happier than these past months. Not because of Williams or Arizona, but because of you." Lightning flashed, illuminating the small cabin and the emotion on Adam's face. The thunder that followed seemed to break something loose in him. He leaned forward, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Margaret," he whispered, "I love you. I think I've loved you since you stood facing down that tornado with more courage than sense." A joy unlike anything Margaret had known spread through her. "And I love you, Adam, with all my heart." His kiss, when it finally came, was worth every moment of waiting, tender at first, then deepening as Margaret responded, her arms sliding around his neck to draw him closer. The blanket fell forgotten as they held each other, the storm outside forgotten in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally parted, Adam rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I should have done that weeks ago," he murmured. "Yes," Margaret agreed with a smile. "You really should have." They remained in the lined shack through the night, the storm continuing until dawn. Adam insisted Margaret take the cot, while he slept on the floor before the fire. Despite the discomfort and the impropriety of their situation, Margaret found herself treasuring these quiet hours, listening to the rain on the roof, watching the firelight play across Adam's sleeping face, and marveling at how completely her life had transformed since coming west. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that they would be the subject of considerable gossip upon their return to Williams. Adam appeared unconcerned as he checked her ankle, which had swollen further overnight. "Does it matter what people say?" he asked, helping her to her feet. "I intend to ask your uncle for permission to court you properly as soon as we return. Given a little time for your ankle to heal, I hope to make you my wife before summer's end if you'll have me." Margaret's heart soared at the certainty in his voice. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Garrett?" Adam smiled, gathering her close. "Consider it advance notice of one. When I formally ask, I'd prefer it not be in a lined shack with you wearing muddy clothes and unable to walk properly." "I would say yes regardless of the setting," Margaret assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. They returned to Williams by mid-morning, Margaret riding double with Adam since her mare had presumably returned to the ranch. As expected, their arrival caused a stir. Margaret disheveled and clearly injured, both of them showing signs of their night in the wilderness. Samuel rushed from the store when they arrived, his relief at seeing Margaret quickly giving way to understanding as he observed the protective way Adam helped her down and the unmistakable change in their demeanor toward each other. "The storm caught us in the canyon," Adam explained. "Margaret's mare spooked and ran off, her ankles badly sprained, and we had to shelter in my line shack overnight." He met Samuel's gaze squarely. "I'd like to speak with you privately, sir, when convenient." Samuel glanced between them, noting Margaret's radiant expression despite her obvious discomfort. "I think I can guess the topic," he said dryly. "Come inside, both of you. Margaret needs tending, and it seems we have matters to discuss." By that evening, the news had spread throughout Williams. Adam Garrett, the territory's most eligible bachelor rancher, had formally asked for Margaret Zimmer's hand in marriage, with a wedding planned for August once her ankle had fully healed. The town's reaction was largely positive, though some young ladies expressed disappointment, and a few older residents raised eyebrows at the circumstances of the couple's overnight absence. Such concerns were quickly dismissed by most, however, given Adam's reputation for integrity and the obvious devotion the pair shared. For Margaret, the weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and happiness. Her aunt's wedding dress was altered to fit her. The store was decorated for the modest reception that would follow the ceremony, and plans were made for her permanent move to the ranch. Samuel, though clearly saddened at the prospect of losing his niece and store helper, couldn't hide his pleasure at her happiness. "Judith would be delighted," he told Margaret as they sorted wedding gifts one evening. "She always hoped you'd find a love match rather than a marriage of convenience." "I never expected to find it in Arizona territory," Margaret admitted, fingering the simple gold band Adam had given her his mother's ring, which he had carried west as a remembrance and now offered as a symbol of their future together. "Life has a way of surprising us," Samuel replied. "Especially on the frontier." The wedding day dawned clear and hot, typical for an Arizona August. The entire town seemed to turn out for the ceremony, held in the white-steepled church at the center of Williams. Margaret, radiant in ivory satin and lace, felt none of the nerves she had anticipated, only certainty and joy as she walked toward Adam, who waited at the altar with an expression of such naked adoration that murmurs rippled through the congregation. Their vows were simple and heartfelt. When Adam slipped the ring onto Margaret's finger, and the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared left no doubt in any witness's mind of the depth of their feelings for each other. The reception at the store lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. As sunset approached, Adam found Margaret sitting with Mrs. Peterson and several other ladies, discussing plans for the ranch house. "Mrs. Garrett," he said, still seeming to savor the sound of her new name, "I believe it's time I took you home." The women exchanged knowing smiles as Margaret rose, embracing each of them before taking Adam's offered arm. They said their goodbyes to Samuel, who held Margaret a moment longer than necessary, whispering, "Be happy, my dear. That's all I've ever wanted for you." "I am, Uncle," she assured him, kissing his cheek. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." Their departure from town was marked by cheers and well wishes, a shower of rice, and the traditional banging of pots and pans as they drove away in Adam's wagon, now decorated with ribbons and flowers. Margaret leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling both exhaustion and exhilaration as they left Williams behind. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Garrett?" Adam asked softly, noting her quietness. Margaret looked up at him, at the strong profile she had come to love so dearly. "Only that we didn't do this sooner," she replied, squeezing his arm. The ranch house had been transformed in preparation for their arrival. Mrs. Finley had outdone herself, filling the rooms with fresh flowers and preparing a wedding supper laid out in the dining room. More significantly, she had discreetly withdrawn to her own cottage after showing them the improvements made to the main bedroom, now brightened with new curtains, linens, and feminine touches Margaret had selected. Left alone, husband and wife stood momentarily awkward despite the months of growing intimacy between them. Then Adam stepped forward, taking Margaret's hands in his. "I've imagined this moment for so long," he admitted, his voice husky with emotion. "Having you here as my wife in our home." Margaret felt a blush rise to her cheeks but met his gaze steadily. "As have I," she confessed. Their kiss began gently but quickly deepened with months of restrained desire. When they finally drew apart, breathless, Adam swept Margaret into his arms and carried her up the stairs to their bedroom, where the rest of the world fell away as they discovered each other fully at last. Later, lying in Adam's arms as moonlight streamed through the window, Margaret marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from Boston school teacher to frontier wife, from lonely independence to profound partnership. "What are you thinking?" Adam murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm grateful for tornadoes," Margaret replied with a smile, tilting her face up to his. "Without one, we might never have met." "I'd have found you eventually," Adam said with confidence, kissing her softly. "Some things are meant to be, storm or no storm." Margaret believed him. In all the uncertainty of life, especially on the frontier, their love had become her surest foundation, as solid and enduring as the land that had brought them together. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Margaret bringing her organizational skills and education to complement Adam's practical experience. They expanded operations, added more hands, and soon became one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Their family grew as well. Their first child, a son they named Samuel after Margaret's uncle, arrived just over a year after their wedding. He was followed 2 years later by twins, a boy and a girl, named James and Elizabeth, and eventually by a fourth child, another daughter they called Ruth. Samuel Zimmer lived to see his great-nephews and nieces, though he passed peacefully in his sleep the winter Ruth was born. He left the store to Margaret and Adam, who hired a manager to run it while maintaining ownership, ensuring his legacy continued in Williams. Mrs. Finley remained with them until arthritis forced her retirement, when she moved to a comfortable cottage Adam built specifically for her on the ranch property, where she could enjoy her remaining years, surrounded by the family she had come to consider her own. The town of Williams grew with the railroad's expansion, bringing new opportunities and residents. Margaret established the town's first proper school, teaching there part-time while raising her children and helping Adam with ranch business. Her influence extended beyond education. She helped organize a library, a ladies' aid society, and eventually campaigned successfully for Arizona statehood. Adam's Ranch, renamed the Double G after their marriage to represent their partnership, became known throughout the territory for its quality stock and fair business practices. Adam himself served on the territorial council, and later as a county judge, his natural sense of justice and integrity making him a respected figure in regional politics. Through it all, through droughts and prosperous years, through illnesses and celebrations, through the territory's transition to statehood, their love remained the center around which their lives revolved. What had begun in a storm cellar during a tornado had weathered every challenge life presented, growing stronger with each passing year. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration that brought friends and neighbors from miles around to the ranch. During the festivities, Margaret found Adam standing alone on the porch, looking out over the land they had nurtured together. "Remembering something?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. The years had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes, but to Margaret, he remained as handsome as the day he had pulled her into that storm cellar. "The day we met," he confirmed, drawing her close against the evening chill. "I keep thinking how differently life might have turned out if I hadn't spotted you on the road that day. Or if I hadn't listened when you called me to safety," Margaret added, resting her head against his shoulder. "Thank God for your good sense," Adam said with a chuckle. "And for your watchfulness," Margaret returned. From inside came the sound of laughter and music, their children, their friends, the life they had built together. Adam turned to his wife, taking both her hands in his. "I loved you then," he said simply. "I love you now. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." Margaret's eyes glistened with tears of happiness. "As I love you, my dearest Adam." She reached up to touch his face, marveling still at the blessing of their union. "We've weathered many storms together, and always found shelter in each other," Adam finished, lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that held all the passion of their youth and all the depth that decades of shared life had added. Around them, the Arizona twilight deepened toward night, stars appearing one by one above the ranch they had built, the family they had raised, and the love that had begun with a tornado and a storm cellar so many years before, a love that, like the land itself, had only grown more beautiful with the passing of time.